The following is episode 2 of the Octagon of Reason. I talked about the nature of this show, from its name to its mission, and why I think the pursuit of truth should be at the forefront of the human experience. So if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and tell us what you thought of the episode in the comments down below. Also, make sure you turn on the notifications bell to make sure you never miss an episode. Because it's primarily a podcast, you can also find it on Spotify as well as Apple Podcast. You just search Octagon of Reason, so make sure you follow us on those platforms as well. I post a lot of Octagon of Reason content on Instagram and on Twitter, so follow me on my Instagram, which is at Galton Giovanni, and my Twitter is at KGM2040, that is 2040. So without further ado, my name is Galton Giovanni Massinga, and this is the Octagon of Reason. So the Octagon of Reason, right? What is it about? I remember the first time I uttered the words Octagon of Reason. I was having a conversation with a professor of mine, Professor Eric Sampson, who I think will soon be a guest on the show. So we were having a conversation. I don't exactly remember the topic of the conversation, but I know that at some point in the conversation, we were talking about the necessity of speaking up and challenging ideas or thoughts that you don't necessarily agree with, while also allowing yours to be challenged without resorting to insults or the over-reliance of emotions. And I think I told him that as individuals, we have to step into the Octagon of Reason in the pursuit of truth. And what I meant by it is stepping into this metaphysical battlefield, right, where you're engaged in this hard-fought conversation, hard-fought debate with somebody on a very sensitive topic, right? And that's essentially the Octagon of Reason. So you have two or more individuals who are talking about this very sensitive issue, right? This very sensitive topic, and they just go all out. That's essentially a battle within the Octagon of Reason. Obviously, the name Octagon derives from the MMA octagon-shaped cages, right? That's the idea that I had in mind. UFC, that's the cage. So you step into the octagon, but unlike MMA fights, instead of using fists and kicks to win a battle, you use reason, right? And the whole point of it is to find the truth of the matter, because I believe that when it comes to ethics, which is essentially what we are going to be talking about here in the Octagon of Reason, the truth must exist. It does exist. I am 100% convinced that there is such a thing as the truth when it comes to ethics, and that's the whole goal. That is the whole mission of the Octagon of Reason, which is the pursuit of truth, right? But before we delve into what it means to, like, what do I mean by the pursuit of truth? What do I mean by the truth being objective? I first want to lay out some ground rules here, right? When it comes to UFC, boxing, or any combat sports, there are always rules. You can't just go there and just hit your opponent with whatever you want or however you want, right? You need to abide to certain rules to make sure the fight is fair, right? So that's the same thing here in the Octagon of Reason. So the first rule, I like to call it the rules of reason, right? So the first rule is no insults, right? You attack the idea and never the person. That's the first rule. I think that oftentimes we get too attached to ideas that we think that when somebody attacks an idea, that person is essentially attacking the person who's uttering that idea. But that's not the case, right? An idea needs to be detached from the person who's postulating that idea, right? You can definitely attack that idea without attacking the person. That's a logical fallacy, the ad hominem fallacy, personal attack. So my goal here is to make sure that whenever we talk, we make sure to detach the person who's saying the idea, postulating the thought or whatever, from the idea itself. Because one thing about the Octagon of Reason, which, one thing I have in mind about this is that nothing is off limits. Like, absolutely nothing is off limits. There's nothing you can't talk about, and anything can be talked about, essentially. Because if we're talking about ethics, and we're talking about, things that are very dear to us, things that we've grown up to, right? Ideas that we've grown up with, then it is essential that we say what we think, right? And uh, if we start delineating what people can say, right, then we stop people from thinking. Essentially, one of my favorite quotes by Jordan Peterson is, I think it goes something like, "In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive," right? In the sense that you're not ought to be offensive. But if you're going to think about something, there's a risk there that you're going to offend somebody, right? You're not ought to offend anybody, but there's a risk there. But you need to be willing to sort of take that risk if you're willing to think, right? So nothing's off limits in the Octagon of Reason. Anything can be talked about, and everything should be talked about. That's my view. That's what I think. That's my philosophy, right? So that's the first rule. You never attack the person, you instead attack the idea. The second rule is, I think this is kind of hard to explain, but the way I try to phrase it is, we must define the problem first, right? Let me explain what do I mean by this. I think definitions are important. Oftentimes, when I've seen this, when people are having a conversation and they're disagreeing with one another, I've noticed that sometimes it's not they're not disagreeing because they have different opinions on the matter at hand. Sometimes they're disagreeing because they have different definitions of the topic, right? Jordan Peterson says that, again, Jordan Peterson, we're going to be quoting Jordan Peterson a lot on this podcast. So he says that when you define something, as much as you're saying what it is, you're also saying what it is not. In essence, when you define something, you sort of create a mental image of what that thing is. And with that image in mind, you're not only able to recognize that said thing, but you're also able to look at something else. And if those images do not match, then you know that it's not, that whatever you looked at afterwards, it is not, the same as the first thing that you define. It sounds a little bit complicated, but let me try to, give an example to make sure you understand this better. Say we're talking about capitalism, right? This is actually a true story. I was once having a conversation with a friend of mine. The conversation went on till like 4 a.m. or something. We started at 9 p.m. It was a long conversation. And we're talking about capitalism, and he said that capitalism, I'm paraphrasing here, it was essentially a zero-sum game, right? Where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I told him that that is not capitalism. That is not the definition of capitalism. That is your opinion on capitalism, right? Capitalism is an economic system that that advocates for private property, and pricing is done by supply and demand, right? That's a rough definition of it, right? But essentially, those are the components that define what capitalism is. To say that capitalism is a system where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and use that as a definition of capitalism, that's not a definition. That's an opinion of it, right? And I was telling him that that's your opinion on capitalism. That is not necessarily what capitalism is. And the importance of a definition is that it is neutral, right? When you're having a conversation with somebody about whatever, doesn't matter what you guys are talking about, you first need to establish a definition. You first need to have a neutral definition, because once you have the definition, the whatever opinions you guys bring forth, right, will be based on that definition that both of you agreed on, right? And that's why we need to have a definition. That's one of the rules we have here in the Octagon of Reason. Because if you're talking to somebody and you guys have different definitions on the topic of discussion, what's going to happen is, the longer the conversation goes, the bigger the sort of divergence will be, because each of you each of you guys' arguments are based on the definitions that both of you brought forth. So you're having a different conversation at that point. It's not because you're talking about two different things. So that's why it is always important to establish a definition before you start talking about anything, right? Especially when it comes to ethics, especially when it comes to things that are by nature very sensitive. We need to understand what are we talking about here. In essence, those are the rules of reason. Nothing's off limits. There are three rules, actually. Nothing's off limits, no insults, always attack the idea and never the person. And the third one is we must always define the problem. So rules of reason. Now, this is going to be very helpful because now we're going to be, delving into the topic of today's episode, which is essentially truth, right? The pursuit of truth. And the big conversation around truth is whether truth is objective or is subjective. I posted something a couple of months ago, maybe it was 3 months ago, still in the summer. I posted something on my I posted a question on my Instagram story. I asked my followers if they thought the truth was objective or subjective, and I went back and forth with a few friends of mine on this one. And my argument was that the truth was and is and should be objective, right? And I was saying this because, again, I was coming from a sort of ethics / morality standpoint. I was saying that I think the truth should be objective because the truth sort of defines our world, right? Is what sort of defines and builds our sense of reality. If the truth is not objective, meaning it is subjective, then each of us ends up defining our own reality. And if we define our own reality, that means that we all live in different realities, which seems nice. Like I get to define my own reality, I get to choose, what I think it's true and what I think is not true. But in reality, that is not a good thing. As a matter of fact, it's actually a dangerous thing because we live, as human beings, we're social creatures, so we need to live as a society. But if we all have different realities, then it is almost impossible. It's practically impossible that we live together because there's no sort of reference of what is right or what is wrong because we all built our own individual realities, and that's just not okay. We must have some sort of binding reference for what is true, right? And I was talking to a friend. I was saying that, and she was saying that well, actually, most of the people I talked to about this kind of had the same approach to it, right? They thought that the truth was, subjective, right? Because they were saying that, we can all have our individual truths because what is right for me, maybe it may not be right for you, and what is wrong for me, it may not be wrong for you, right? And I was saying that even if you do believe that, right? I said, even if you do believe that, when you encounter somebody that's that has a different approach to what you believe to be right, say you think liberty, freedom is right, and nobody should enslave another, right? That's a great thing. I think that is right too, right? But if you come across somebody who thinks that slavery, enslaving another human being, it is in fact a good thing, right? If you believe that the truth is subjective, then you shouldn't be mad at that person. You should in fact be like, oh, okay, great, that is your truth, right? But I know for a fact that that is not going to be your reaction to that. You will say to that person, no, you're wrong, right? But if you think that the truth is indeed subjective, then you have no grounds whatsoever to tell a person who believes that slavery is okay that they're wrong, right? Because by doing that, what you're essentially doing is imposing your idea of what you think is right onto that other person. I was in class, actually was Professor Will's class. If you haven't watched the first episode, I was having a conversation with Professor Wills. So this was around this time last year. And he shared the story when, before the USA went into a civil war, where Abraham Lincoln said that if slavery is not it said, if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is, right? I'm paraphrasing. Maybe he said, if slavery is not unjust, then nothing is. But essentially, we're saying if slavery is not a bad thing, then nothing is. It was alluding to an idea of objectivism, that there's some objectivity, there's some sort of objective morality that that determines that slavery it's something that is objectively wrong, right? Doesn't matter how many people may think that it is right, slavery is objectively wrong. And I used that example in one of the conversations with my friend, right? One of my friends, when we were talking about this, and my friend said that, yes, slavery is wrong, but society had to. It is wrong because we agreed that it is wrong, right? So it's like this. It is as if slavery only became wrong when we agreed that slavery is wrong, right? But that's not really the case. Our agreement on slavery being a bad thing is not what made slavery a bad thing, right? The fact that you later on a discovery of something is not in itself sort of the creation of that thing. I don't even know if I'm making sense here. So just bear with me for a second here, because I'm trying my best to sort of lay out my argument here. But my point is that one thing can be either right or wrong, regardless of when you went on to realize that that thing is right or wrong, right? Slavery has always been wrong, whether people agreed on it or disagreed on it, right? Whether people fought over it or did not fight over it, slavery is wrong, right? Because there's a moral judgment that upon it that says that slavery is indeed wrong, and that is why when you talk about the truth, right, especially from a moral standpoint, you need to understand that it can't be subjective, right? You can definitely have your own preferences on things in life, right? There are things that are by nature subjective. I think that entertainment is subjective. I think sports, in the sense of like what team you decide to support, that's subjective, right? But cuisine is also subjective, right? Different foods from different cultures. That's amazing. That is subjective, right? That is great. Culture in itself is also subjective, right? It's also relative. So it's it's all about your preferences. It's all about where you grew up and all that. But when it comes to morality, we can't have a subjectivity there. We can't allow the subjectivity to permeate into how we approach morality, because if you do that, then we have no grounds whatsoever to judge things that we know to be wrong, right? If morality is subjective, that means that we have no grounds whatsoever to judge Nazis, right? Because that's just their truth of the matter. They think that the Aryan race is supreme. The fact that you don't think that it is, then you're trying and you tell them that, hey, you guys are wrong, then what you're essentially doing is imposing your view on the world, upon them. And that's wrong within your own worldview, if you think that morality is subjective. So there must be a moral reference, sort of an objective moral reference. There must be sort of something that binds us all as human beings. And I know that there is such a thing, because in all these situations, I want to believe at least that you would agree that there's such a thing as wrong and such a thing as right when it comes to slavery, when it comes to I don't know, terrorism, and a bunch of different things that we battle with, we wrestle with every day. So that was essentially my argument, that there must be some sort of reference when it comes to morality, and that said reference is, of course, objective. Now, you may ask me, okay, Kelton, okay, let's say I agree with you, right? What is that reference, right? What is that reference? So uh, which is a perfectly fair question, right? If you say that there is a moral reference, an objective moral reference, then what is indeed that reference? Before I answer that question, because I already have an answer for it, but before I answer that question, I just want to give you one more, um, just another argument to prove that there must be some sort of objective moral reference. Say, uh, if you say that, if you try to compare, say, the Nazis with, um, I don't know, the Nazis with who? I don't know, modern day Switzerland, the Swiss government, right? And you look at them and you're like, you know what? I think the Swiss government is a better government. Let's say it's a fairer, or it has a, yeah, it's a fairer, a better government than the Nazi government, right? Because they treat their citizens better, as a whole, than the Nazis did. What you're essentially doing there, you're not merely comparing the Swiss government with the Nazi German government. You are comparing them both against an ideal. And what you're saying is that the Swiss government conforms to that ideal more than the Nazi Germany, the Nazi German government. So you're saying that there's an ideal upon which we judge good and evil, right? And you say that the Swiss government is closer to that idea than the Nazi government is. So by nature, we already, that's what we do when we compare stuff. That's why when you say that, um, I don't know, LeBron James is a better basketball player than come on, than Troy Bolton from High School Musical, right? You have an idea of what it means to be a good basketball player. And when you compare LeBron James with Troy Bolton, I think, is it Bolton? Or it is Bolton. Yeah, Troy Bolton. You are essentially saying that LeBron James is closer to that set ideal of, best, the quintessential good basketball player than Troy Bolton is. So we do that all the time. So there must also be an objective moral reference, right? From which we judge right and wrong. I think, this is my argument, that reference must be God, right? Here's why. For us to be able, first of all, for a fact that uh, you understand what morality is, and you also know that you didn't create that morality. You may have learned it from somebody else, but you didn't create it, right? You can say that, I learned it from my mother. Yes, you learn how to be kind from your mother, but your mother didn't create kindness, right? That's just something. There's just this natural law that binds all of us, right? And that natural law sort of helps us understand what is right and what is wrong. Not only helps us understand what's right and wrong, but also compels us to act in a certain way, which is, the right way, right? We not only know that good is better than evil, we are compelled to act in goodness, right? So for us to be compelled, for all of us to be compelled to act in a certain way without having to agree on what that certain way is, although we have rebelled against that certain way all the time. We do that every day, right? But we still know that goodness is something that we ought to do. That means that there must be something, right? Or in this case, that I said God, someone that is above us, that sort of determined what that said thing is, what good is by nature. So I think that thing is God. And I think God is, the moral lawgiver. We're going to be talking about this more, more extensively in later episodes. But what I mean by this is that when you say that there's a moral law, right, you also have to postulate a moral lawgiver, right? And I believe God to be that moral lawgiver, right? Because and the reason why I say this is when you look at the Bible, when you look at, at Genesis 1:26, and when God says that when he created man and woman in his image, right? So that means that the way he's wired, right? That's also the way we are wired. He's all good, therefore we know we need to act in goodness, right? And that's essentially the part of the conversation I was having with Professor Wills last week, right? However, we were also given something called free will, right? So with free will, as much as we know what we ought to do, because that's how we were built by God, right? We also have the choice not to act against that, that manual that we were given, right? We have the choice to act against God's will. Essentially, that's what free will is, right? But we still have we sort of still have a memory of how we ought to act, right? We ought to be morally good, right? And that sort of natural law, that law must come from God. That's essentially the argument that I was I was making when I was talking about with my friends. So let's backtrack a little bit here, because this is something that I think deserves its own episode for us for me to be able to expound more on it. So I just wanted to touch on it a little bit more, because I think that I think that it's a fair question. So where do we get this sort of sense of objective morality, right? So that's what I think. So obviously I need to expound more on it, but that's what I think. So let's backtrack a little bit more, right? Going back to the actual topic of today's episode, which is truth, whether it's objective or subjective, right? So that's essentially what it is. We have a sense of reality, we have a sense of the world, right? That can't We can't sort of have different realities, because once we have different realities, we're essentially we start living within our own little realities, within our own little bubbles. And once that happens, then we lose grounds to even communicate with one another, because we have completely different realities. When somebody commits murder, we say we want justice. We have a clear idea of what justice is, right? There's no we can't have different definitions of justice, right? Again, going back to definitions, that's why definitions are definitely very important, right? We can't have different definitions on justice, because once we do that, then we have no grounds whatsoever to to live with one another or to judge one another. Think of it as, if you go into the court of law, right? If you have your own truth, then it is almost impossible to find who committed the crime, right? Because the suspect, the person who's being accused of committing a crime, let's say the person goes in and says, no, I didn't commit a crime. That's my truth. My truth is that I didn't commit that crime. But the person who's accusing the other be like, no, you did commit the crime, right? That's that person's truth, right? If they have their own truth on the matter, then how do we go about, sort of solving the whole situation? But the reason why you're going into the court of law in the first place is to find out the truth, because the truth must exist. The truth, when it comes to when it comes to when it comes to morality, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to how societies are built, must be objective. It must be certain, and it must be established. So that's essentially what I had prepared for you guys today. I hope it made sense. I hope we are obviously going to get a chance to talk about this a little bit more, but that's essentially what I had prepared for you guys today. This was the Octagon of Reason, episode 2. Make sure you subscribe, give it a thumbs up, tell me what you thought of it in the comments. I said a lot here, so tell me what you thought in the comments, and we can continue the conversations there. Until next time, bye-bye.